Hello and welcome to the pre-recorded Bible class for March 20th, 2022. And we're going to actually look at a few different people. We're going to start looking at Malchus, but we're going to look at then, since he's a servant of the high priest and we don't know a whole lot about him, we're going to go on and talk about the high priests as well. So again, today we're going to start off with looking at Malchus. And so Malchus here is a servant of the high priest who's with the group that arrests Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane and is the one whose ear Peter cuts off. All four Gospels record this event, but only John gives us the names that Peter's the disciple who cuts the ear off and that the servant's name is Malchus. Our attention is drawn to that night when Judas betrays Jesus as Peter cuts off the ear of Malchus. And this is from the introduction that if you were here on Thursday for the midweek service, is from there. The chief priest, scribes, Judas and Peter all seek power and control of the situation in Gethsemane, but Jesus is the only one with the true power and authority and lays it down as he does with his life. In his resurrection, Jesus will take up his life again, reclaiming his power, control, and authority which extends throughout the earth and the heavens. And so again, all three Gospels record this, but we're going to look at John 18 because this is where he's named. And so when Jesus had spoken these words, so that's finishing up what he talked with his disciples at the Last Supper. He went out with his disciples across the Kidron Valley, where there was a garden, which he and his disciples entered. Now Judas, who betrayed him, also knew of the place, for Jesus often met there with his disciples. So Judas, having procured a band of soldiers and some officers from the chief priests and the Pharisees, went there with lanterns and torches and weapons. Then Jesus, knowing all that would happen to him, came forward and said to them, "Whom do you seek?" They answered him, "Jesus of Nazareth." Jesus said to them, "I am he." Judas, who betrayed him, was standing with them. When Jesus said to them, "I am he drew back and fell to the ground. So Jesus asked them again, "Whom do you seek?" They said, "Jesus of Nazareth." Jesus answered, "I told you that I am he. If you seek me, let these men go." This was to fulfill the words that he had spoken, "Of those whom you gave me, I have lost not one." Then Simon Peter, having a sword, drew it and struck the high priest's servant and cut off his right ear. The servant's name was Malchus. Then Jesus said to Peter, "Put your sword into its sheath. Shall I not drink the cup that my Father has given me?" And so here's, again, the main account we get with the names from John. And again, all the Gospels include this detail in, but John's the one who gives us the names. We see Jesus had told Peter they could bring swords, but in the Garden of Gethsemane, in each Gospel, Jesus gives a slightly different reason, different emphasis on why he's going along with it and not fighting back, but kind of recognizing that this is what getting arrested is what needs to happen for Jesus, and that these others, the servants, don't need to be in the way. And we'll probably talk about it some again when we talk about Pilate. But the reason that the Roman soldiers are along with him, along here, why they'd be in Jerusalem, as opposed to just the high priests and their guards and servants and things. But again, you'd think, servant of the high priest is probably going to be a fairly cushy job, and yet Malchus finds out the hard way that's not the case. But as we find out in the other Gospels, other things happen. So Luke's the one who tells us that while Jesus was still speaking, there came a crowd, and the man called Judas, one of the 12, was leading them. He drew near to Jesus to kiss him, but Judas said to him, "Judas, would you betray the Son of Man with a kiss?" And when those who were around him saw what would follow, they said, "Lord, shall we strike with the sword?" And one of them struck the servant of the high priest and cut off his right ear. But Jesus said no more of this, and he touched the ear and healed him. And so Luke gives us the account that, again, all the disciples seem to be eager to try and fight back, even though there's more of the others than of them, and At least the Roman soldiers are probably fairly well armed and armored. But Luke also then is the one that gives us the account that not only that Peter cuts the ear off, but also but Jesus heals the ear, heals Malchus, heals the servant, and so fixes what his follower had done wrong. All right, and so this also then comes back to bite Peter later on. So now Simon Peter was standing and warming himself. This is by the fire outside the high priest's residence where Jesus' trial is. And so they said to him, "You also are not one of his disciples, are you?" Peter denies it and said, "I am not." One of the servants of the high priest, a relative of the man whose ear Peter had cut off, asked, "Did I not see you in the garden with him?" Peter again denied it, and at once a rooster crowed. And so, again, this comes back to bite Peter, because the fact that Malchus is the servant who who's has his ear cut off by Peter, then one of his relatives sees Peter and confronts him, and is the reason for this third denial. So that comes back to bite Peter, and we'll talk more about Peter. We talked more about Peter in Bible class a couple weeks ago, about his denials and things, but he'll be the topic of the midweek service this coming week. So again, we don't really know all that much about Malchus, but then early tradition claims that the fact that Jesus heals his ear leads him to convert and start following Jesus, but we don't get a whole lot of extra bits on that. He doesn't seem to be a whole prominent. All right, and again, so since Malchus was short, we're going to look at then his masters, the people he's serving, people he's working for, Annas and Caiaphas. Annas and Caiaphas first get mentioned in Luke 3. We're not reading the whole chapter here, but when Luke introduces John the Baptist. And so begins that portion of his thing. So in the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius Caesar, Pontius Pilate being governor of Judea, and Herod being tetrarch of Galilee, his brother Philip tetrarch of the region of Iturea and Trachonitis, and Lysanias tetrarch of Abilene, during the high priesthood of Annas and Caiaphas, the word of God came to John, the son of Zacharias, so John the Baptist, in the wilderness. And so Annas and Caiaphas are both prominent enough then that Luke uses them as, along with these other Roman officials, as kind of a way to define the time that this is happening. Now, of course, so high priesthood of Annas and Caiaphas, there can only be one high priest. How are there two? Well, and this is somewhat confusing, and people have made a big deal about it, but it really just seems to be a matter of convention. So Annas was officially high priest for 10 years, from about 6 to 15, when then he was deposed by the procurator Valerius Gratus, who's Pilate's predecessor. And so, especially once the Romans had conquered Palestine, so in the Second Temple period, then, obviously in the Old Testament with the First Temple, the high priest had to be a Levite. It was often a descendant of the previous high priest. It was a lifetime appointment, that kind of thing. But once they were under Roman rule, then either Herod or his son, or then later, as we see here, the Romans would be the ones who'd appoint the high priest. And there'd be some quid pro quo going here. But again, Annas was high priest from 6 to 15, so during that gap year where he's not, we don't know a whole lot about Jesus or what's going on in his life. So, and Jesus' crucifixion and ministry takes place kind of 30 to 33-ish AD. So why would he, if he was high priest and then deposed, why is he still called high priest? Well, he remained one of the most influential political and social individuals, aided greatly by the fact that his 5 sons and his son-in-law Caiaphas all served at some point in later words as high priest. So again, he's high priest because he'd been high priest, and then even if he's not officially serving, he's still kind of the power behind the thing because it's his family's still in control. Many Jews then also resented this arbitrary deposition and appointment of high priests under a foreign power, since it had been a lifetime appointment under Mosaic law. So again, just the fact that the high priests were changed could be changed as often as once a year. Annas and Caiaphas seem to have among the longest tenures, but it used to be a lifetime appointment. Now it's not, and it's another sign that the Jews are not independent, not in full control of their area. And so they resent that a bit. And so then again, Caiaphas, though, is high priest from about 18 to 36 A.D. So again, there's a little gap between Annas and Caiaphas, but then Caiaphas is, again, he's properly called Joseph, son of Caiaphas. He was married to the daughter of Annas, and Gratus, Pilate's predecessor as the Roman governor, made him high priest after removing the previous guy from office. Again, he's 18 years, and that suggests he has a good working relationship with the Roman authorities, and that then Pilate retained him as high priest, because we'll talk more about this when we talk about go in depth on Pilate, but when the previous guy is removed and Pilate comes in, Pilate leaves Caiaphas as high priest, but then both of them are removed in AD 36. Now, this being close to the Romans would have allowed him to, maintain that power, but would have created problems with some of the other groups that, especially the Pharisees. Again, remembering the two main groups in Judaism in Jesus' day are the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and together they form a council known as the Sanhedrin, and the high priest is kind of the head of that council. And that then the Pharisees are very concerned with keeping religious laws and keeping things pure, but the Sadducees are less concerned with that. They keep trust in some of the writings, but not all of the extra stuff that the Pharisees added. They are also much more philosophical, less supernatural. They're the ones who don't believe in a resurrection. They don't. One note said they don't believe in angels. So they're less concerned with those kinds of things. And the Sadducees also are then less concerned about, being ritually impure by working with the Romans, and so that creates some tensions there as well. But then so Annas and Caiaphas as high priests would have been kind of walking that tightrope of how do we got to keep the Romans happy and the Pharisees happy, as well as their own party happy. And so keeping the peace and just keeping the money flowing is a good way for that to happen. And when that doesn't happen, when there's problems, that's when they snap into action, which is what we see here with Jesus. All right. Okay. So again, we see this in John 18. So right after Malchus's ears cut off, the band of soldiers and their captain and the officers of the Jews arrested Jesus and bound him. And first they led him to Annas, for he was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, who was high priest that year. And here, some people think that this, high priest is changing every year. Others think that this is just John reminding us that he's high priest in this year, in terms of the infamous year, this important year when Jesus is crucified. It was Caiaphas who had advised the Jews that it would be expedient that one man should die for the people, and we'll circle back and look back at where he actually does that. But so Jesus is led to Annas first. Again, he's not official. He's kind of the power behind the throne, but that gives plausible deniability somewhat. And also lets Annas see things and get things started by himself before Caiaphas does things, because once Caiaphas does things, they get officially noticed with both the good and bad things that come with that. All right, so then there's a little interlude, and then the high priest Annas then questioned Jesus about his disciples and teachings. And Jesus answered him, I've spoken openly to the world. I have always taught in synagogues and in the temple, where all Jews come together. I've said nothing in secret. Why do you ask me? Ask those who have heard me what I said to them. They know what I said. And when he said these things, one of the officers standing by struck Jesus with his hand, saying, Is that how you answer the high priest? Jesus answered him, If what I said is wrong, bear witness about the wrong. But if what I said is right, why do you strike me?" Annas then sent him bound to Caiaphas the high priest. So again, Jesus first appears before Annas. Annas is the informal high priest, who kind of the, power behind the throne sort of thing. Someone who would be referred to as a high priest more out of tradition or respect for a previous position than because he officially has it currently. But that gives him a chance to still exercise power and do so sometimes in ways that give Caiaphas some plausible deniability. All right, then switching accounts, we see, though, that again, this incident's mentioned in all the Gospels. Then the chief priests and the elders of the people gathered in the palace of the high priest, whose name was Caiaphas, and plotted together in order to arrest Jesus by stealth and kill him. So this is the beginning of the plot. But they said, "Not during the feast, lest there be an uproar among the people." And so their original plan is not to do it. And then since it is during the time of Passover, when there's this huge crowd, they're doing this quickly in the dark and secret. And so a lot of Jesus' trial kind of doesn't follow the way that things are supposed to go, even if they try and do a couple things to follow the letter of it. And then those who had seized Jesus after Gethsemane led him to Caiaphas the high priest, where the scribes and the elders had gathered. Peter was following him at a distance as far as the courtyard of the high priest, and going inside he sat with the guards to see the end. Now the chief priests and the whole council were seeking, and again this is the Sanhedrin, the group of about 70 religious leaders made up of, again, both members of both Pharisees and Sadducees, are seeking false testimony against Jesus that they might put him to death. But they found none, though many false witnesses came forward. At last two said, "This man said, I am able to destroy the temple of God and rebuild it in 3 days. The high priest," this is Caiaphas, "stood up and said, Have you no answer to make? What is it that these men testify against you?" Jesus remained silent, and the high priest said to him, "I adjure you by the living God, tell us if you are the Christ, the Son of God." Jesus said to him, "You have said so, but I tell you, from now on you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming on the clouds of heaven." And the high priest tore his robes and said, "He has uttered blasphemy. What further witnesses do we need? You have now heard his blasphemy. What is your judgment?" They answered, "He deserves death." And so here's Jesus before Caiaphas, guards about to strike him, and here we've got Caiaphas tearing his robe to, again, show just how disrespectful, how seriously he's taking Jesus, blaspheming, claiming that he's God. And this, of course, then leads into why they send him to Pilate. Again, because, and we'll again talk more about this when we talk about Pilate. But Pilate and the Romans would be there because it's Passover, just because it's a time when there's lots of people gathered together and be there to keep the peace. But because the Romans are there, then they can crucify Jesus if he's accused of treason, not just blasphemy. Whereas if the Sanhedrin accuses him and convicts him of blasphemy, that's a religious charge, and they could other times do what they wanted. We see that later with the first martyr, Stephen, who is stoned. But stoning was the religious punishment. Crucifixion, of course, is the Roman punishment. And partly to fulfill the prophecies and things. That's why Jesus gets crucified. And again, the idea of the council making these plans, they figure this is kind of a long-term, long-simmering thing, because Annas and Caiaphas know how kind of tenuous their things are, that their relationship, their power is based on the fact that they can keep the peace. That's why they've been appointed high priest. That's why Pilate's letting them be in charge. And if they can do that, as long as they keep the peace, they're fine. And when they don't, then that's when problems arise. And so when Jesus seems to be threatening the peace, that's when they act and start. But they've started planning long before this. And so the chief priests and the Pharisees gathered at a council and said, and this is right after the raising of Lazarus, What are we to do? For this man performs many signs. If we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him, and the Romans will come and take away both our place and our nation. And so we can see what they're concerned. Again, if Jesus becomes too popular, if too many people are following him instead of the priests or the Romans, then there's going to be issues, and Rome will come in and smack things down. Because among other things, just the fact that people are calling Jesus Lord. Well, if Jesus is Lord, that means Caesar is not, and that's a political statement. But one of them then in the council, Caiaphas, who was high priest that year, said to them, "You know nothing at all, nor do you understand that it is better for you that one man should die for the people, not that the whole nation should perish." He did not say this of his own accord, but being high priest that year, he prophesied that Jesus would die for the nation, and not only for the not for the nation only, but also to gather into one the children of God who are scattered abroad. And so obviously, Caiaphas doesn't know that speaking like this, but as high priest, he speaks and knows then that this will happen, that they need to do something to stop Jesus, and that it's better that Jesus die for the nation than the whole nation get wiped out. Though, of course, as we'll see later on, this doesn't actually fix things, because just 40 years later, in 70 AD, the Romans will come in because the Jewish revolt has happened, will come in and conquer everything. And also remembering part of the motivation of what's going on here is, in John, the cleansing of the temple is early on, but all the other synoptics place the cleansing of the temple during Holy Week. And that too would have ticked off especially Annas and Caiaphas, because as high priests, they'd be getting a cut of the whatever money the money changers and the animal sellers are doing. And again, this would be representing something that, service that needed to happen, that the, people weren't going to travel with animals for the sacrifices, and so it made sense to buy them in the temple, and that you couldn't have all the Roman coins had pictures of Caesar on it, and you can't have a picture of you can't have any idols in the temple. You can't have any, so a picture of Caesar counts as an idol, and so they had to change it into temple money. But then, of course, greed comes in, and they skim off the top and pay off the high priests, and as long as that system works, everything goes, but then you're getting further and further away from what the temple was supposed to be. All right, so this is from what Paul Meyer writes in one of his books. The high priest Caiaphas was a worldly, wise Sadducee whose overriding policy was to maintain the uneasy compromise between Jewish and Roman authority in Palestine. Now at the time of when Jesus' crucifixion, now in his 15th year, and again he rules 18 years. So the crucifixion is usually dated about 33 AD. In his 15th year as high priest, Caiaphas, like any Jew, would have preferred an independent Judea controlled by God and his vice-regents, the priestly establishment. So again, not only as a good Jew, but also then, as a political animal, he'd want more power. But he had the political sense to realize that Rome was not a passing power in the eastern Mediterranean, and the road to success lay in continuing cooperation with the empire and its representative, Pontius Pilate. So don't rebel against Rome, because Rome's going to last for a long time. For political reasons, to prevent another revolt that would be subdued by Roman legions, Jesus would have to be dealt with. And he mentions in passing, too, that there, of course, had been other revolts that the Romans had to put down. And every time that happens, of course, then you get Rome wonders why that's happening, why there's revolts, what's going on. Might think they need to change leaders, change who's in control. All right, so we always think of Annas and Caiaphas as being active at the at Jesus' crucifixion. And that's the main account. But then they continue up to appear in Acts 2. So on the next day after Peter and John had healed the guy at the temple and get arrested, the rulers and elders and scribes gathered together in Jerusalem with Annas the high priest and Caiaphas and John and Alexander and all who were of the high priestly family. Again, Annas has 5 sons and at least a daughter who marries Caiaphas. So this is high priestly family. You've got a decent chunk of people. When they had set them in the midst, they inquired, by what power or by what name did you do this? Did you heal the guy in the beggar at the temple? And Peter, filled with the Holy Spirit, said to them, rulers of the people and elders, if we are being examined today concerning a good deed done to a crippled man, by what means this man has been healed, then let it be known to all of you and to all the people of Israel that by the name of Jesus Christ of Nazareth, whom you crucified, whom God raised from the dead, by him this man is standing before you well. This Jesus was the stone that was rejected by you, the builders, which has become the cornerstone. And there is salvation in no one else, for there is no other name under heaven given among men by which we must be saved. And when they saw the boldness of Peter and John, and perceived they were uneducated common men, they were astonished, and they recognized they had been with Jesus. And so Annas and Caiaphas then continued to be in control for a couple more years afterwards. Now then, Caiaphas, the extra biblical accounts, though, of Annas and Caiaphas, there's a few. One of which then, again, if you heard Pastor Mark's sermon last week, as he was talking about what was going on in 33 AD and all the different things, he mentioned this in passing, that there's actually this ossuary that was discovered. And so an ossuary is, well, what you see here, and it's a fancy word, bone box is the simple description. But that, and so that the way the burial practices worked is that people were buried in a tomb, but then after a year or so, after all the flesh had time to decay, then the bones were brought together and put in a box, and depending on the person, you got a fancier box than others. And so while doing some digging in Jerusalem in 1999, they found some of these ossuaries, and this one is known as the Caiaphas ossuary, because it's carved on the name that it's Joseph, son of Caiaphas. You can kind of read a little bit of the English there, maybe if you zoom in a little bit, that the Caiaphas family burial was found in Jerusalem, and again, probably, there's been some debate about its authenticity, but the general consensus seems to be that this probably could have been actually the bones of Caiaphas, who again would have been in, because the bones were supposed to be about a 65, 70-year-old guy, date to about the time of Jesus, and so it all kind of matches out that way. And so we've got some proof then that Caiaphas actually existed outside the Bible, and then in addition to that, and of course, and these guys are again mentioned by Josephus as well, but then Annas is also then mentioned in there's a woe or a malediction, or words of curse, bad words, in the Babylonian Talmud, where it says, "Woe to the family of Annas, woe to their serpentine hisses." And so sometimes we'll talk about the hiss of Caiaphas, and that seems to be reference to this. So this is from the Babylonian Talmud. It's a collection of the Jewish rabbinic writings from. It's compiled in about the fifth century. But again, there's some negative aspects, some bit of blame in the rabbinical writings to Annas and his family for having been sellouts to Rome, and also for then their family having been in control of the priesthood in the time leading up to the destruction of Jerusalem. And so, yeah. And so that's what we know about Malchus, Annas, and Caiaphas. Thank you for joining us.